Recording. Okay, awesome. All right. So I am super excited about this session. And thank
Great.
you again.
Yeah, so it's gonna be fun.
Okay, great. You can hear me still? We're still good?
Good. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, Kim, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast and talk about all the good things Myers-Briggs today. Before we jump in, though, and talk more about that, do you mind just spending a few minutes introducing yourself and telling everybody a little bit about what you do with Elevate Moms?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love being here, and I love the work that you're doing on this podcast. It's such an important focus. So I'm a therapist in the Nashville area, and I've been doing therapy for gosh over 15 years. Um, I just noticed that there was a real need to pour into moms. I think we're more connected than we've ever been in this world, but the loneliness epidemic is real. And so, I just decided it was time to kind of put a stake in the ground and say, okay, we have got to call out as moms the loneliness that we're feeling, the overwhelm that we're feeling, the kind of the negative self-talk that we have in our souls, and build a community and a place where moms can be seen and known and can heal, right, those sticky spots that maybe they've been carrying with them and haven't addressed that are getting in the way. It worked to stuff them until it didn't. Or just, growth of, who am I and who do I want to be outside of motherhood, or inside of motherhood for that matter. But what's my purpose? What's my longing? What do I want? What's my calling? And so we do therapy at Elevate Moms. We do coaching. We have connection groups where we have a topic and we bring a group of women together, and it's just beautiful to see the community that comes out of that. So that's what I do.
Oh, awesome. And thank you so much for sharing all those pieces because, um, you know, I feel very blessed to call you one of the coaches that I work with, and you just do such amazing work. And I have to say, just a little plug. So, when we first met each other through the Moms with Impact retreat, those couple of days just really filled my bucket at a place where I really needed to be, I guess, loved on and filled my bucket back up. And really got me thinking about today's topic and thinking about, how we can parent a little differently. But it's also interesting to me when I think about Myers Briggs and thinking about like just our personality types and how that plays into how we parent and how we show up and how we respond. And I'd used Myers Briggs before in my professional positions. I've been in education for a long time, and so I'm very familiar with that. But I'd never thought about it from a perspective of parenting and how I show up and how my child shows up. So that was I mean, I think that was one of the probably, um, I guess, one of the bright lights of that whole retreat. And it really just, I guess, kind of brought some things to the picture for me to go, oh, okay, now that makes sense as it relates to. I know we'll get more into it in a minute, but just like my daughter's very introverted and I'm very extroverted. And as you were walking through those pieces, I was like, this makes so much more sense now. And so I just think it's a great topic for us to talk about today because I really feel like, anything we can do to understand ourselves better and then understand how we parent and why our kids are doing the things they're doing. They're not doing it to get on your nerves. They're doing it because it's who they are, right? And so I just thought it would be a great opportunity for us to talk about that. And I really enjoyed digging into that part. So my graduate degrees are in educational psychology. I was a former school counselor. So all this stuff I very much geek out on. Like I just love all these pieces. So thank you, Sam. I know we would
Wow. I know
talk
we
for
probably
hours. Yeah.
talk. I know exactly. We don't have enough time for all of the things we would love to connect on, but it's so powerful. Like you said, once you have a map, once we have a map for how we're wired, how our kids are wired, then all of this things make sense and it reduces conflict, it reduces chaos, and it gives us a window into, how our kids are created.
Yeah, it just kinda all falls into place. So let's start there. So tell when someone asks you to kinda tell them what the Myers-Briggs is, or, I think people call it the MBTI as well, but, most of us know it as Myers-Briggs if you're familiar with it. If someone says, like, "What is it?" Like, "Tell me about what that is, Kim, and why in the world would I wanna know those things?" So let's kinda start let's start with some foundational pieces.
Yeah. So the Myers-Briggs has been around for a long time, for quite a while. I would say most people, when I bring the Myers-Briggs up, most people say, "Oh yeah, like I've learned about that at some point." But it's such a powerful tool to giving us clarity into how we're wired and our preferences. And so all it does is it measures preferences in 4 different areas in our life. And with those preferences, it tells us, kind of where we shine and where we're a little bit clumsier, right? It's like what's super easy for us and what's more of a stretch for us. And so, with those 4 spectrums that we'll talk about in a moment, with those 4 spectrums, you can then divide it up. There's actually 16 different personalities within the Myers Briggs that are 4 letters. And so, each spectrum gives you a letter. For instance, the first spectrum, is how do you want to recharge? Are you an extrovert or are you an introvert, right? If you're an extrovert, your letter would be an E. If you're an introvert, your letter would be an I. And so it's used frequently in the workplace and in, like you said, in school settings, college settings, things like that. I started off in team building before I moved into coaching and therapy. And we used it quite a bit in the environment that we were in. And it again gave team members a map to each other. But having those tools for our family to see how our kids are wired, it just opens up so much. And so you can take, I know you'll have show notes to all this, but
Yes.
you can take the Myers-Briggs online at, the Myers-Briggs organization. If you just go to Myers-Briggs.com, I think it is. And there is a fee for that, but that's going to be the most pure test, right? The most validated test. And you can also take it, there are various free versions online,
Right.
16personalities.com, things like that, where you can find it as well. Um, and so with that, there's 4 spectrums. And so I'll just jump into those.
Can
Um,
I ask you a quick question, Kim, before we move on? I was also this is another kinda aha I had while I was at the Moms with Impact retreat, which was I love that you call it a spectrum because you might be 100% extrovert, but, like, I don't know if it's as I get older, I feel like I move a little bit one way or the other depending on my circumstance, but I love that you said, something around the thoughts of you might not be pure one way or the other, right? Like, you could be kind of in the middle, like, you could be in a like you said, a spectrum or you especially if you take, I guess, the official one, it'll give you, I guess, numbers or points, or how does that work? As
yeah,
that you know exactly okay.
Yeah, even on the, free versions, like the 16 personalities, it'll still give you a percentage of where you fall on that.
Right.
And so, if you think about it, you're either right-handed or left-handed. And so I'm right-handed. And so my preference is to write with my right hand. Now, there was a time when I was, in elementary school where I broke my shoulder and my upper, arm, and I was in a sling, and I had to use my left hand. Well,
Mhm.
I could, it was hard to read, it was not legible, but it was doable, right? And so we
Right.
all, again, we all have those preferences, and if we're in the middle, I call it, you're ambidextrous, you can write with your left hand and your right hand, and it just means you're balanced and that you're able to kind of adapt and you're a little bit more flexible, in your preference lifestyle.
Okay, awesome. That's very helpful as especially if people will go back and take it or retake it to kind of see like where am I falling and what does that mean? So yeah, I remember that now from our results that there was those percentages. That's helpful. All right, sorry, I didn't mean to hold you up there, but I just kind of wanted to put that little plug in before we talk about the 4 different pieces and how does that look. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's jump ahead then. I'm good to go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that because that's an important part of it. So the easiest one is the extrovert introvert, and that's where we'll start. That's spectrum number one. And the question on that is how do we recharge or regain energy? Do we recharge in solitude or do we recharge around others? And so this one, most people have a framework for this. And so it's easy to digest, but introverts and extroverts, both can get misunderstood. And so introverts can get kind of mislabeled as wallflowers, as not social. And really, the truth is, they can be super social. It's just that at the end of the day, um, do they recharge from being alone or from being around people? It's like if you think about your iPhone battery, if you've got an iPhone, extroverts, when they're around people, that battery gets bigger and bigger and bigger and fuller and fuller and fuller. And when introverts are around people, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the introverts have to go find a place to dock in and recharge. And so extroverts, they like interacting with others. They like usually a quick pace. They're usually good at multitasking and love the kind of the energy that comes from a vibrant space around them. Whereas introverts, they prefer working alone in small groups. They prefer to be more deliberate and like to focus on one task at a time. Typically. So, when we were running the retreat, I don't know if you remember this, but when we were running the retreat and did this at Moms with Impact, we divided the extroverts and the introverts into two separate groups. And the extroverts they all come with all of this energy and all these ideas, and there's always more of them. And they had a task to complete, and the extroverts have a hard time getting focused and getting the task done. Whereas the introverts, they quietly extrapolate and think through the plan for this task, this kind of competition that we set up. And they usually nail it because they think first and then they share their ideas. Whereas extroverts, they verbally process as they're going. And so it's fun to watch. And then even within the introverts, we even had individuals who kind of went off and did the task by themselves because they didn't even want to talk to everybody else while they were having to come together and
I remember that.
solve this challenge. Yeah. And so
And I was gonna say too, Kim, what was so, like, I guess, eye-opening for me is, you know, my daughter has not done the inventory yet, although I'd like to do it. She just turned 14, so I'd like to do it with her. But at the same time, as I listen to, like, the different pieces, I know in her core she's an introvert. And what was so helpful, just to tell a little quick story, what was so helpful for me as an example was that because I'm extroverted as a parent, I so thought, like, on the weekends, like, we need to be involved and we need to go run and do this and that. And my daughter is good if she's got a blanket and a book and she's on the couch, and, like, that's all she needed. And once I came to the retreat, I was like, "Oh, so I need to be okay that she's okay," right? Because I felt like, "Oh, if we're not doing all these things," not necessarily to, keep up with the Joneses or whatever, but it was like, for me, I felt like, "Oh, she's too old for play dates," but back in the time, it would have been, "Who can we go to the movie with or go to the park with?" And and then I realized at almost 14, I'm like, "Oh, great, what a disservice!" Because really what she needed, but it gave me space now to connect with her differently and really appreciate that that's what she needs and be okay giving her that space. And so, I've been able to be very deliberate coming back out of the retreat to let her have some space to make decisions as we're in this preteen mode, right, and teenage mode, to think about, like, it is okay if she's like, "Mom, I'm good, like, I need to chill out and not be talked to, and I need," she calls it me time. "I need some me time. People have been talking at me all day, like, I just need a minute." And she's
yes,
able to verbalize that, but I got a newfound respect for it once I looked at through this lens of, and acknowledging, right, that that's not what fills me up, although I do like some quiet time. But I you know, I'm very much a multitasker and like to be around people and, and do like to go and do things. And so, but it gave me a different perspective, I guess is what I'm wanting to share. The different perspective of, it wasn't that I was wrong or she was wrong or I was right or she was right, but it was like, let me look through through her lens as to what really would fill her up, and us just hanging out together and playing a game or her reading a book was enough, right? And it was good.
yep. Yeah, and that's our job as parents, right? Is to hone in and really become a student of our child, to understand what it is that they need. And I share this story. I was speaking one time, and I had this sweet mom at the end um, share, she kind of had this fear about her son. So she went to pick him up. He was in like a Lego robotics class, or club or something after school. And she's an extrovert. And she went to pick him up and kind of panicked because he was sitting by himself. All these other kids were in a cluster working on their project, and he was sitting by himself, in, alone. And so, of course, he gets in the car and she's trying to restrain herself, but she can't help herself. And she starts pinging him with questions and, why weren't you with the other kids? And what was wrong? And what was happening? Is everything okay? Is there anything I need to know about? Right. And he said, Mom, everything's fine. Like, I could have sat with them, but I really wanted to get it right. And I really wanted to do it myself and kind of like be proud in what I created. So he just kind of self isolated. But as moms, we can jump to the conclusion that something's wrong with our child if we are extroverted and if they are an introvert, and they don't need, 10 kids at the birthday party. They just need one or two. They don't need, all of the things, all the play dates and whatnot that we might need if we're extroverts. And then on the opposite, I always share that I'm an extrovert, but I was raised in a family of introverts. And
Mm.
so I was the one that constantly felt like, "Oh my gosh, why can't I have friends?" And I wanted, to fill my cup in a different way than my parents would have naturally filled it. And if I had understood that about myself at an earlier age, it would have been so helpful.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for letting me talk about a couple of examples because I just feel like it really is helpful. And it's again going back to it's important to know yourself, but then it's also important to know the family that you live in, right? The family that you love on, and the more we know about each other, I think the more grace we can also give each other for our differences.
Absolutely. Yes. And so that second spectrum that is so important to know is sensor versus intuitive. And so on that spectrum, you're either an S or you're an N, and you're not an I for intuitive because I's already taken by introverts. We're X's or we're N's. And this spectrum looks at how do we take in or process information? Do we take information in with our senses? Or do we take information in with our gut? And these two preferences, like this spectrum, is really a source of the most miscommunication and misunderstanding and cause of conflict because, it's so internal and it's hard to, it's really hard to kind of sit in someone else's shoes and understand how they can see things so differently. And so sensors, the S's, they prefer details. They value sensibility, practicality, facts, experience. They trust the past and reality. And intuitives, on the other hand, value possibilities, imagination, fiction, hunches, speculation in the future. They like to brainstorm. They like to kind of think in paintings, whereas sensors like to think in spreadsheets. And so, um, I'm married to a sensor and I'm a strong intuitive. And my sensing husband, gosh, we've been married over 25 years, but my sensing husband really had a hard time understanding when we were newlyweds, why he might walk in the kitchen and I might have left a cupboard open. Or one of his favorite things is, to tease me about is the dishwasher light in our kitchen. He really, really likes that dishwasher light to be turned off after a cycle runs. And on my intuitive scale of things that are on my brain or that I think about, it's like it's not even on it. And, you can see how that can be a source of conflict because he would want the dishwasher light turned off, and I didn't even see the dishwasher light. And he would deduce automatically that I was just not honoring his wishes. I was doing it on purpose because he couldn't see how I couldn't see it. And so it's a big source of conflict.
Yeah, I love that example too, especially when we think about parenting and living in just living in a family, right? Whatever your family may look like, whether it's just you and one child, or you and a significant other, whether you have multiple children, but you can see how like you said at the very beginning of the conversation, which is how conflict can be misunderstood, right? Like, you didn't walk through and think, "Ooh, I'm gonna leave that light on because I know it agitates him," right? Like, you didn't even see the light, you know? And so, if you don't know that about each other, then, it can cause conflict, not on purpose, it just happens, right? So, I think it is so important to learn more about how we think and how we, react and what our preferences are, like you said, so that's so good. So, thank you for sharing that one, that's a good one.
Yeah. Well, and we jump to conclusions because we're all biased towards our own type, right? And so
Right.
so we do jump to conclusions. And so if you're a sensor parent and you've got a child who, maybe leaves their socks on the floor when you ask them not to, or, is super artistic, but then kind of is like Pigpen in Charlie Brown, like there's just kind of a desk
Right.
around them. It's very possible they are an intuitive. And, it's hard. 75% of the world, so to speak, are sensors, and 25% are intuitives. And so it is harder to be an intuitive because we live in a sensing world. And
Right.
and sensors can have a strong kind of perception that intuitives are, spacey and just kind of head in the clouds. And sometimes we can be, but it's not because we're choosing it. And so again, it's important to just have that map and understand and have kind of a perspective about the differences.
And I wonder too, we didn't prep this to talk about this, but and so it might be another episode at some point, but I even wonder too on this particular one, how it interplays with, like, executive functioning. Like, when we have kids that just, you can't give them but one thing to do at a time. You have to kinda trunk apart chores and things like that, and we say, "Oh, that," especially in the world I live, like, they're really struggling with executive functioning. Maybe they are, or maybe that's just how they show up, right? Like, after you shared all that, it makes me think, like, I'm curious to I'm gonna have to go back and do some research to see, how does that I know they're probably looking at things from different vantage points, but it'd just be interesting to look at some information around that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because we do as an intuitive, it's harder for us to break things down. And
Mhm.
so again, that's kind of the possibilities, the theory. We sit
Right.
theory and it can be hard to chunk things out. And so as a
Mhm.
parent, it is really helpful if you've got an intuitive child, um, and you are a sensor to chunk things out. Now, on the opposite, if you're an intuitive parent and you have a sensor child, so our daughter's a sensor, and I learned really early on with her that my theory and my kind of abstract thinking was not concrete enough for her. She needed more structure and she needed
Mhm.
more details. And so I did learn that, writing things down, giving her lists, really did help her thrive.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. I just we were talking about it, I was just thinking that, instead of looking at it as a deficit, I guess, like, oh, my child's really struggling with executive functioning, it might be, no, your child really is, um, more of a, did you call it intuitive? Did I get that right?
Yep, more of it
If,
too.
yeah, that's just the way they show up, right? And so I don't know, just I guess a more positive spin on looking at things through different lenses. So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, and then the third, spectrum is thinker versus feeler. So you're either a T or you're an F or you're somewhere in between, but this preference is how do we make decisions? Do we make decisions with our heads or our hearts? And so this is another one that's pretty straightforward, but, as you can imagine, thinkers value objectivity, policy, laws, rules, impartiality, justice, standards. They're more analytical and they are firm in their decisions. And feelers, on the other hand, value subjectivity, values intimacy, persuasion, harmony, sympathy, devotion, and humanity. And so it can be another source of conflict because it's, if we're making decisions based on our heart and then somebody else is making an objective decision, it can feel hurtful. Um, but it is, again, it's great to have balance between the 2 when we can.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, that's a good one.
And so I think, my husband, I'm going to use him again as an example, is a strong, strong thinker. And I'm a
Mhm.
strong feeler. And so it's helpful for me when I can go to him and I can bounce things off of him and try and gain perspective of how he might do it when I've got my heart tied into something and I'm having a hard time making a decision. Um, and, thinkers really look at things through that lens of fairness. And so if you have kids that, kind of get hung up on, they come to you and they're saying, oh, well, this happened with my sibling, or, this is not fair. Then you can assume that they fall more into the thinker camp. And if somebody is, again, coming to you and more versed in their feelings and their sadness and what's going on inside their hearts, they're gonna be more, along the feeling spectrum.
Yeah, those are some great examples.
And then, do you have any sorry, I don't know if you'll wanna edit this out, but do you wanna talk about
Yeah.
should I go on?
I was trying to think of an example. Do you have an example you can share for that one?
Uh-huh. Um, so I have, a friend whose daughter is a strong thinker. And she was actually hosting a birthday, and her daughter, I think, was in middle school at the time, but she had a whole group of girls over at her house, and the girls wanted to do something, to play a game that, they all enjoyed, and she just didn't think it was fair what was happening, and
Mhm.
she stood by those principles even though all these kids are over at her house for her birthday, and,
Mhm.
it's supposed to be kind of this fun thing, and she would not budge on the principle of this game to the point where it kinda busted up the whole party.
Oh, wow.
And my friend came to me and was like, "I don't even what is wrong? Why is this why is she doing this? What is happening?" And, looking through this lens, she did not care what people thought. She did not care if she was gonna make enemies. She was basing her judgment upon her truth and,
Mhm.
pasta friendships. And so these strong thinker kids, they can kinda dig their feet in and not budge, and that can be a little bit difficult to work with at times.
Yes, I definitely have one of those at my house. So it's good to know that though, right? Especially when you're thinking about what when you know that, so then as you're navigating through responses and how to best support them, like when you know that about them and then you know how you show up, then I just think it's more of a win-win situation, I think,
Yes.
the more
Yes.
you know. Yeah.
It is, and, we have a family system program that we help people run at Elevate Moms to just create harmony and consequences and, structure in the family, and
Mhm.
that is one of the things that we get the best feedback on is the kids are so happy because it's fair, right? It's
Yes.
now objective and, not subjective based on, mom or dad's mood or energy level at the time, um, and so just seeing the way that that really works for those thinking kids, it just kind of relaxes their need to, fight for themselves.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then if you as a parent know where that's coming from, you can help support that in a different way.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
makes sense.
Yeah. And then the last spectrum is the judge perceiver spectrum. And that judge perceiver spectrum, you're either a J or you're a P. And it's how we like to live our lives. Do we want to live them with closure or do we want to live them open and fluid? And so our judgers, it sounds like judgmental, but it's not. It's just named that way because judgers like to kind of like take control of their environment and execute and make decisions based on it. And so they like their lives to be complete. They like planning, decision making. They like systems. They like conclusions, deadlines, action, closure, decisiveness, and urgency. They get things done. And perceivers, on the other hand, they prefer to live spontaneously and go with the flow. They want life to be flexible. They'll research over and over and over. They want to explore. They want to focus on the process and be adaptable. So this open-endedness, again, going with the flow, open options, and experiencing the journey is really important to our perceivers. And so again, you can see how this can cause conflict, right? So if if you are judgers running the home and you create systems and structure and you've got a perceiving child who waits till the last minute or wants to put things off till quote later is one of the favorite words for a perceiver, then you can see that it would be difficult. And on the other hand, same thing. We've got friends who both parents are perceivers, and they've got a daughter who is a strong judger. And their lack of structure, their lack of systems, their complete pivoting and open endedness was causing her to feel very, very stressed. And when she was younger, she was actually acting out. And they thought that, that it was a behavioral issue, but really it was coming because of her need for systems and predictability, and they were not providing it for her.
Yeah. It's funny because I tell people I'm a type A, but maybe I should start saying I'm more of a judger. Because the things that you described is like where I thrive, right?
Yep.
Like and it's interesting to think because I think my daughter is more the opposite, but at the same time, like if I'm planning, let's say we're planning to do something on a Saturday, she does not like to be told last minute. She's going to want to be told a couple days ahead of time so she can kind of get her mind around what we have planned. But at the same time, if there's like something at school that has to be done, like she's just kind of going with the flow kind of kid. So I'd be interested to see where she falls on her percentages for this one for sure.
Yeah, she might be balanced in that. And with
Mhm.
judging, so I fall right in the middle, but when our daughter who's now 23, when she was in kindergarten, we had our son was 2 years younger. My husband was deployed in Iraq for a year with the Navy, and so everything was kind of topsy-turvy in our home. And Kyla, our daughter, left, she finished kindergarten. It was the beginning of summer, and she would start crying because she missed the structure that
Mhm.
the classroom provided her. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She knew when it was story time. She knew when it was snack time, and she
Right.
thrived in her little judgerness. And, and so I quickly thought, okay, I was a former teacher too, so I kind of have it in my soul, but thought, okay, I'm gonna make this big poster board schedule for the day for her. So when she wakes up, she just knows what the plan is. And it was life-changing for her because she knew when when she woke up exactly what the routine was going to be and when things were going to happen. Now, our son Luke, who's as far perceiver as you can get, that would not have worked for him at all. Luckily, he was too young to
Mhm.
pay attention to it. But if I had said, "Hey, Luke, it's summer, and here's your schedule," he would have had a fit. And say, I
Right.
don't. Just got to really tune into our kids and their unique wiring and how they're created, and do what we can to meet their needs so that they can thrive the best they can. And that doesn't mean removing the bumps. That doesn't mean making, life so easy for them that they don't build resilience. It's just understanding their natural preferences and how they are wired.
Right. No, I agree. Uh, it was just so eye opening. Like I said, I had spent many years like around Myers-Briggs and around the conversations, but pivoting and looking at it from a different lens, from a parenting lens, was just, I don't know, it was something that I was like, well, why didn't I think about this before? Right. But at the same time, I was like, it was so helpful at the time our daughter was 13. And so just like we're all in the middle of all the fields, right? Getting ready for high school and with just all these pieces that are coming and going, social, emotional, academic, just the whole thing. But to be able to step back and look at it through this lens, I just felt like was really helpful. And really helped me to better understand her story and where she's coming from. There's still stuff that has to be done, right? There's still project deadlines and all that, but just to be able to understand why she approaches things or prefers things the way that she does. And so it was really helpful for me. And I think too it gave me the grace to say, "Oh, it is okay. Like it is okay for you to not overschedule y'all. It is okay to take a weekend off and just hang out, right?" Like so it and we're just in that culture of go 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 all the time. And so um just being more deliberate about what I'm doing as a parent, right? Leading a household, right? And trying to just kind of figure those things out. So I appreciate that that was a component that you and Carrie both brought into the retreat, because again, I just never thought of it from that lens. So having said that, if we have moms listening that, you know, we ran through those different pieces and they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember taking that," or "That resonates with me." How do you think, I mean, how would you position for a mom as far as our individual, types, as far as how should that influence the way we show up as parents? Are there any takeaways from that? And then we'll talk about it from a different perspective. But as a mom listening and thinking about how I show up, how do you feel like that could influence the way I parent? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. We have to know ourselves first, and we can't parent well if we don't understand how we're wired because, um, as an extrovert, if I don't know that I'm an extrovert and that I will, like, just completely overschedule my life because I wanna pack in all the fun and all the people and all the things, then I can't set boundaries around that to protect my family because, I've got this strength of relationships, but the weakness for me is is creating that stillness, creating that quiet time, creating rhythms that need to happen in our home. And so by knowing who we are, we can then know, okay, what's the stretch for me and where do I need to be more intentional? I mean, that's really what we want to do as parents is be intentional and we want to parent for the long game. And if we want to raise healthy adults, right, then we have to start in the home. We have to start young. And so
Mhm.
then we know who we are, and then we know who our children are. Then again, we've got the map to say, okay, um, I am an extrovert, but this is not true for me, but let's imagine I had all introvert children. Well, then I have to rein it in and I have to do what I need to do to set them up for success. Because as parents, it's not about us, right? It is about our
Right.
children, not in a way where we're worshiping them and we're putting them on a pedestal and everything's child centered. I don't mean it like that, but it is our job to cultivate their strengths and to equip them to know how they are best suited to navigate in life.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, so a quick story here. So I know that we talked a little bit about this before, but just so everyone gets the benefit of the conversation. So a few weeks ago, I took our daughter Hattie to a book fair, a book festival, really. It was in Texas. So yes, we flew from Atlanta to Dallas, Texas for the weekend, and it was a teen, and it was a middle school and young adult book festival, and they brought in all these. It's a free event. They brought all these authors in. I wanna say it was between 50 and 60, I can't remember the exact number. They had panels all day. Excuse me. They had panels all day, then they had book signings in the afternoon, and it was back to back. Like, there wasn't like, even lunchtime, they had stuff planned in. And so, a couple of things I did, because I know my daughter very much needs those breaks. So, we stayed at the conference hotel. It was a little more expensive, but I was like, "Well, right there." So, we were able to walk across the street throughout the day and take a couple of breaks for her. And then I had to be okay because I'm looking at it was like a regular conference. She'd never been to a conference. So you know how when you go to a conference, there's the opening, session, and there's all these panels. I had it packed out. I had a pen. I had written down 11 o'clock. We can see Shannon Messenger here. At 1 o'clock, we can see Ariel Stein. Like, I had it all mapped out. I said, "Here are my thoughts, but you take the agenda." That was part of her birthday because she wants to be an author. So I'm trying to, give her exposure to all those good things. But at the end of the day, I was like, okay, so this is all about you. So these are some things I think will be good, but we'll go to whatever you want to. So we did have to take some breaks during the day, which I was like, gosh, we're missing some good stuff. But I knew she needed it to be able to make it to the end of the day, right? And so I had to be really purposeful, where I can remember days when we'd go to Disney when she was little and we would go, go, go. She'd be asleep in the stroller. We're still go, go, going. And so, just, giving her some space to really be able to enjoy something that was really for her. It was someone asked me, "What books did you buy?" I'm like, "I didn't buy any books." Like, she bought lots of books, but it was all about that whole trip was about her, right? And what I could do to love into her and to also give her an opportunity to meet some authors face to face. They talked about, I know you're an author as well. they talked about the experience of writing a book, and it was just I loved it. Like, I had a great time, but having said all that, I knew some of it based off of this conversation, I knew her well enough to know I'm gonna have to give her some space. Where 2 years ago, I might have been like, "Oh, no, we're gonna get there at 8, and we're gonna stay till 4 o'clock. We're gonna do all the things."
Packing it
And
all
I've
in.
Right, I've been packing it all in, and, and I'm not gonna say that she wasn't tired because she was still tired at the end of the day, but I really leaned into what I know about her from the perspective of what are her preferences, giving her some autonomy to kinda, um, navigate the day, if you will. But yeah, I just wanted to give a quick example of that because I don't know. I mean, obviously she's tired. I'd give her a break, but I don't know that I would have the same perspective a few years ago, especially when she was younger and I felt like I got to get all the stuff in, right? Especially when you go somewhere like Disney, right? Like you got to do all the things. Yeah, but I guess I'd just say that to say, like, give yourself some space to really think through these pieces because it really can impact the way you parent. But I think you said this, Kim, a few minutes ago, which is a big thing that I really talk about a lot, which is relationships. Because at the end of the day, she may not remember I helped her with a math problem this week, but she'll remember I sat with her. She'll remember I was there when she got frustrated and needed to just kind of vent, right? And so, thinking about ways to continue to build that relationship because, as she becomes an adult, I wanna continue to have those relationships, those strong relationships, but I gotta be able to understand her better to be able to give her some margin, I guess. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, and at the end of the day, our goal is to be safe parents, right? And what does a safe parent look
Mhm.
like? It looks like we validate our children for who they are, not for who we want them to be. And that we are able to love them unconditionally, even if we don't get that part of them.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I just think about with our daughter came out like ready to run the world, like she's the strongest judger schedule person, right? Our son Luke, like I said earlier, is as strong as a perceiver as you can get. And so just even homework assignments and school projects, I never had to like even ask Kyla if she was on it, doing it because she would get it done so early, right? Luke's favorite word again later, I got it, mom. I got it, mom. I'm like, I don't think you've got it, bud. Like, I just don't think you do. And sure enough, he would get it done just in the nick of time, even though it was super stressful for me. So my job,
Yes.
step back,
Mhm. I have that at home too.
yeah,
And same
and
thing.
let
Later
him
later.
learn the natural consequences, right? Let the school hold him accountable if he doesn't get it turned in. We don't want to rob them of the opportunity to learn life consequences naturally, but we need to make sure that it's not about us and that we are not getting our needs met through our children. For instance, you know, I I know this family where the parents would get so hurt because their introverted daughter would come home from middle school and she would just go right up to her room and close the door and just wanted to chill. Well, like your
Mhm.
daughter, she'd just been on all day and it was taking every ounce of energy she had out of her. But
Yes.
because of the wounds and the sticky spots in these parents, it became personal to them when it wasn't personal at all. And so
Yes.
was an opportunity for them to say, "Hey, we know that you're designed, you need time to recharge. What would it look like if you come home, you go to your room, and then we do a quick check-in, at, whatever time." We just have to work around the differences we
Mhm.
have a group, at Elevate Moms where we do that. We help moms walk through different personality assessments, and we do the Myers-Briggs, we do the Enneagram, we do Gallup strengths and different things like that. But it is amazing, again, when you can kind of, um, when you have a perspective outside of the lens that you're looking through.
Yeah, and I love that, and I love that, like, just having a different conversation because I know for many of us, when we when we realize there's a struggle there for our child academically, and when we realize our kids are struggling to learn to read, and we perhaps get to a point where someone says, "Yes, your child is dyslexic," you go through this period of grief, really, like, you just go through this period and all the grief feelings, but at the same time, like, what you imagined for your child, you no longer know if that's possible, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
because you just don't know, and a lot of times going into the dyslexia journey, a lot of people don't talk about it, and it's not you don't find out about it till you're in it, and so then it's like trying to figure all the things out. So I love when we can have these kind of conversations because no matter what, our kids have strengths, we all have challenges, but just to lean in to what does work for them, I think is so helpful and can take some of the conflict pieces like you were saying earlier. We're not going to be conflict free obviously because we're human beings, but just knowing that about one another can really help, like you said, even just making decisions about vacations and things like that, like, just having those conversations and knowing that about our children is so helpful, and I think sometimes, especially when you start out your journey, it feels pretty hopeless, right? You just feel like, "Is my kid gonna graduate? Can they get a job?" And you might have had aspirations of your child, I don't know, being a doctor or whatever. I mean, there's doctors that are dyslexic, right? So I think it's just you don't know what to expect yet, but I think if we start looking at things through different lenses, like this lens of where how does my child show up? How can we really and we do Gallup strengths at work as well. And so we talk a lot about Gallup and about just leaning into your strengths finder and leaning, which is another perspective because you're leaning more into strengths and not spending so much time trying to make your challenges better, but leaning into the places. And so that's what, I've tried to do with my daughter is leaning into yeah, I would have never thought she was gonna be an author. Like, she struggled to read. It wasn't until 6th grade that she even picked a book up and realized, "Oh, like, this is a whole new world out of academics," right? Like, she learned about character development and plot development, and now you she constantly has a book all the time. So, I never would have thought that, though, 4 or 5 years ago, right? So I just say all that to say, like, I just think it's important that we, as parents, and especially as moms, look at things from these different perspectives 'cause it can what's the word I'm looking for? Re-energize you, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and gives you a way to look at things through a more positive lens than, you go through those days of the sky is falling, which, you may have to be there for a minute or 2, but then you got to move on to, like you said earlier, how can we best position our kids so they can be successful, whatever that looks like, and our daughter's success won't look like your daughter's success, right? Like, it looks different for everybody, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. And to know that you're not walking through it alone, right?
Mhm.
That you've created this beautiful community to support each other. And there's so many different ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we kinda wrap up today, one thing I always like to ask people is, what's the best mom advice that you received as you were, going through all the I know your children are grown at this point, but you may have gotten some good advice lately. But as you think back over your parenting journey, is there any piece of advice that stood out that you're like, "Oh, that was really good?"
Hmm. Yeah, I think early on, I can't even remember where I learned it, but it was this idea of parenting for the long game and not letting every immediate hiccup define you, and to just kind of keep your eye on where you want your kids to be as adults. And like our son Luke says, Mom, it's not that deep. Like, so he says about everything. And, I think as in parenting, I always want to say that to people. It's not that deep. It feels deep right now, but this too will pass. And when you can surround yourself with people who are parenting in a similar way, and who you can link arms with and encourage each other, it makes it so much easier.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Kim, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all your insight and talking more about Myers-Briggs. Like we said earlier, I know we could probably talk for hours on many topics, but I just felt like this was such a good, timely topic for families right now. And to really be thinking about, what this looks like. And so I appreciate you spending time with me today. If anybody wanted to connect with you and learn more about like some of the groups you have or some of the services that you have, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, everything that we offer is on elevatemoms.com. And you can find us on Instagram if you're on Instagram at Elevate Moms Collective as well. And we have great resources and tools to help moms of all ages and stages thrive.
Awesome. I'll also put all of that in the show notes for everybody if they want to grab the links. That's great. So, well, thank you again. I so appreciate you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate our time.
Absolutely. Okay. Hold on, Kim. I'm trying to, can't find the button. Oh, there it is. Okay. Stop recording. There we go.